Hi guys. Before we proceed to this video, we've got something very important to share with you. Neoliberalism, Inequality and Authoritarianism by Professor John V. Kofis is available for purchase. You can order it directly from the publisher Little French eBooks or through Amazon.
Hello everyone, welcome. This is a teaser session on anarchism with a special focus on the United States. Here we are today, June 14th. This is the day that there is a major military parade in Washington, D.C., celebrating both the armed forces as well as the president's birthday, I believe. The situation in mid-June 2025, both within the United States and the world with regard to conditions of anarchy is not very good. The National Catholic Reporter, hardly a publication that is that comes from one of the axis of evil countries, but the National Catholic Reporter recently ran an article entitled Trump Administration Plows On Ahead Releasing Anarchy Upon the World. And I'll explain some of the themes briefly today. And also in this, there's a much more in-depth explanation of anarchy in the analytical video, the longer video, which I invite all of you to view. The word anarchy is classical Greek, which means without authority, in defiance of authority. And anarchists have been around since Adam and Eve. One could argue they were the first anarchists. They defied the ultimate authority, their own creator. And the tendencies of anarchy in human nature, I suppose, defying authority from parents to teachers to government, have been universal. It's not just in any particular country or society, but universal. Anarchy as a movement really takes off as a political movement, takes off during industrial capitalism in the 19th century, when trade unions embraced the anarchist movement and the syndicalist movement in Europe, the United States, Latin America, especially there. The question, of course, is what exactly does anarchy mean? There are various branches of anarchy, from philosophical to political, and the term anarchy has been used to has been embraced by women's movement historically. For example, Emma Goldman was an Eastern European Jewish woman who was both involved in the anarchist movement, the labor movement in the United States. She was an immigrant, as well as the political campaign for peace, for global peace. There have always been anarchists, and the goal of defying authority has been to achieve social justice. This is the purpose of the analytical video, and that is to link anarchy, the anarchist movement, to social justice. However, what we have today in mid-June 2025 is the following situation. Within the United States, there have been in the recent days, I would say weeks, elements that the authorities describe as anarchists. For example, the protesters in Los Angeles, California, against the protesters in favor of the migrants and against the government trying to seize workers arbitrarily in their place of work, whether it's in factories, whether it's in warehouses, whether it's in homes, in schools, by the way, included. And that those have been described as anarchist by the media, the mainstream media. Not that the liberal media has not been critical of the government's attempts, rather heavy-handed in California, but politicians as well, politicians supporting the Trump administration, have described these elements as anarchists in order to stigmatize them, because historically the term anarchist is designed to evoke emotions that these people are troublemakers, they are against authority, they're against order, they're against the law. And the question, of course, and it's a question that is raised in the National Catholic Reporter's article, is who exactly is violating the law, both domestically and procedures, by the way, both domestically and globally. Is it the protesters in favor of peace, in favor of social justice, in favor of civil rights, or is it the authorities? This is a topic that in the future scholars will be digging deeper into it. But right now, what we have is a recent incident, for example, of a United States senator from California who happens to be of Latino background. His name is Alex Padilla, who was briefly arrested, detained, and thrown into the ground. There's video everywhere for this. In California, because he was at a news conference and he wanted to ask a question of the Trump appointed uh, Secretary for Homeland Security, and the police removed him. And unfortunately, a number of people, I believe, including the president, if I read it correctly in the media, said, "Well, he looked like one of the people, namely the Latinos. He didn't look like a senator," which is an underlying, of course, white supremacist remark to make. And there is quite a bit of white supremacy uh, behind the acts of the government. And the only reason there has been anarchy, whether today in the 21st century, in 2025, in June 2025, the only reason there are anarchist movements, or whether in the 19th century, in Russia, in Italy, in France, is because, or in Mexico, for example, is because there has been state-sponsored repression, and the state, instead of carrying out a social contract, engaged in acts of violence, which of course brings about a reaction of violence by the people. The great English philosopher John Locke argued in his two treatises of government that brought about the philosophy of Western liberalism, that the definition of tyranny is when government goes above the law in order to serve interests either of the head of state during the 17th century, during the Glorious Revolution, when John Locke was around 1788, 1789, that meant the king, the monarch. Today, the head of state can be a prime minister or a president in the case of the United States. When they go above the law, they don't respect the law, they go outside the boundaries of the law, whether it's domestic or international, that, according to John Locke, means tyranny. It does not, when the government itself does not abide by the social contract, when it violates the social contract. And in the case of this administration, we have seen, of course, according to US Democratic senators, US Democratic congressmen, and independent observers, that the state has gone above the law, ignores the law, violates the procedures in place. And this is where you get a reaction that the state then describes, using the state itself not following the law, ignoring the law. The state then uses the term anarchist, anyone who is resisting this type of coercive behavior. Anarchists argue that it is the duty of the state to explain its legitimacy to the people, because sovereignty rests with the people, does not rest with the head of state. The head of state is accountable. The term here is accountability. A government without accountability is authoritarian. And when there is an authoritarian government or a government with authoritarian regimes claiming to be democratic merely because it was elected, then of course there is a reaction by the people of resistance, passive or active. Mahatma Gandhi, for example, is regarded as an anarchist. Why was Mahatma Gandhi an anarchist? Because he defied British authority. No one, of course, today, at least most people today, in the world would not call Mahatma Gandhi a pacifist, an anarchist, because he defied British colonial exploitation. And yet, he was deemed an anarchist because he defied British imperialism and wanted the independence of India. So this to give you an example, for example, as a case, very briefly, of what the state can do. The state can define who's an anarchist, who is a terrorist, and use polemical terminology instead of sound analysis. Now, I do invite you to look at the longer video. I do want to say something else. When we look at the state of the United States within, as well as internationally, in mid-June 2025, what we see is indeed violence and turmoil. As I am speaking, there is an ongoing war between Iran and Israel, which Israel started. Obviously, it boasted that it started this war. And despite what Secretary of State Marco Rubio said initially, that the U.S. had no involvement, Trump came out immediately, as well as the government in Tel Aviv, and disputed this and argued that the U.S. was indeed not only consulted all along, but assisted and moved military assets to the region in order to help Israel carry out this war, and indeed it has helped out. There is instability there. There is no end to the Ukraine-Russia war as was promised. There is instability globally because of the tariff wars. There is instability at home because of this obsession that migrants are the enemy, and beneath it, when you scratch the surface, this anti-migrant tendency, what you have is, and the Wall Street Journal, to its credit, by the way, exposed the reality of what's going on here. And that is that this is an anti-labor movement, this a labor policy. not movement. This is an anti-labor policy. The Wall Street Journal pointed out that, in fact, there were not all these criminal migrants running around, and since they were not, the within the White House, certain individuals decided that the U.S. authorities, Homeland Security, and ICE should go after ordinary migrants throughout the United States, and they targeted California. Although California, by the way, has about the same percentage of illegal migrants as Texas, they deliberately chose California, provoking the local authorities there, the state and the Los Angeles mayor and the governor, because they're Democrats. Now, Texas is a Republican state. They didn't go after Texas; they went after California. So this provocation, of course, for political reasons, and to make populist points with the political base of the GOP, creates chaotic conditions, and then the state turns around and says, "Well, it's the anarchists." Although and I'll end with this, there is no statistical analysis. There are no statistics to indicate that there is anything like a huge anarchist movement in the United States. That's long gone. That's the late 19th century, early 20th century. There are no reliable statistics that there is anything like what they're describing. So to merely protest, however, to merely defy policies that peaceful protesters deem repressive, exploitative, unfair, deviating from the rule of law and legal procedure, to merely protest that, one becomes an anarchist. I invite you to please take a look at the longer video and to write questions as comments and join this educational channel. Thank you. Thank you very much.